We're up. This is the Our Town with Troy By, and tonight's going to be a little different, I think, than normal. We've had some, I would call, national level guests at times, and one of those is here sitting in front of me, a gentleman named Benjamin Sanders, and we're going to get into the life of his great-great-grandfather, Wilbur Fisk Sanders, and many of you may be like, well, who the heck is that? Well, you're going to find out. And it's a pretty cool story on many fronts, and kind of a story of Americana, I think, and not in the era of founding fathers, but those that settled the West, right? And he was very much involved with the Wild West and stuff. And so I think Ben here is going to be able to offer some pretty cool insight into a great American. I'm going to call him a great American. I've never met the man. I've read some, I've researched it some, but it seemed like he was a good man as far as where his heart was, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you've written a book, and you've spent much of your life, it sounds like, dedicating your life, and you can get into what that really means. How much of your life have you really dedicated to pulling together research on Wilbur Fisk Sanders? Who in your family was the one that was the biggest flag carrier on his story and kind of reminding you of who, hey, your great-great-grandfather was something?
So my dad is named Wilbur Fisk Sanders III.
Okay.
And it's kind of interesting because he did not name either of his sons Wilbur Fisk Sanders the fourth, because he had always felt like he thought the name was a little onerous for him. So he told us these brief stories, as did our aunts and other relatives, and including my grandfather, Wilbur Fisk Sanders Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always just a little morsel of this bigger story. I'll get into what that was when you're ready.
Yeah.
So my father.
Your father. All right, so here's the high level, right? So Wilbur Fisk is born in New York, kind of in that southwestern corner, kind of just like east of Erie, right? And then eventually moves to Akron with his uncle,
mm-hmm.
Sidney Edgerton.
Right.
Right. And he goes to law school, passes the Ohio bar, and then the part that I'm going to need help in is at some point they head to Montana. Now, at that same time was the big gold rush.
Yeah.
So on their way to Montana, they end up not going to where they were going to go, and then they head down to Bannock, I believe, because the news had gotten out that ultimately ended up being like $50 to $70 million in gold had been discovered there.
Right.
And then he ends up in Virginia City, right? Because Bannock, I guess, had just kind of it grew, and then it just went like a ghost town.
Right.
And then Virginia City became the city that kind of grew with the mining.
Sure.
And it was a very lawless. And Wilbur Fisk Sanders was kind of the first to prosecute someone and hang them in public on the street, right?
Right.
For committing a crime.
Yeah. Basically
Killing another miner, right, over $200 or something like that. And so from there, though, but Sidney Edgerton, his uncle, was the first territorial governor.
Correct.
In that area. And then ultimately Wilbur Fisk was a state senator or a senator. I shouldn't say, I don't know if it was a state at the time.
The first
state senator,
U.S. senator.
And I guess he had other failed attempts at times politically, but ultimately he was in that game.
Right.
But then also there was you kind of read things like there was a love him or hate him type thing with your great-great-grandfather. So
yeah.
Let's pick up. I would first like to know let's just start like in Ohio, if you don't mind.
Sure.
He's with Sidney's family. Whatever. I don't know if he's living in the house or not.
Right. He was living with his uncle. Yeah.
And then why the Exodus? Obviously, there was a ton of movement going west. There was the Great Pioneer Trek going out west. But why was it that they wanted to go to Montana?
Well, so the Civil War broke out. And so the U.S. Congress called Sidney Edgerton back to the Senate. And from Ohio. he wanted to take a commission and fight in the war, but Lincoln wanted him in Washington.
Okay.
And Sanders took a recruiting commission and joined the 64th Ohio Infantry and went with Buell down ultimately to Shiloh, and made Shiloh battlefield by the second day of the battle, towards the end of the day, but then went on to Corinth and down through Iuka, Mississippi, and then through Decatur, Alabama, and into Huntsville, and then ultimately to Stevenson, Alabama, where he resigned his commission over his refusal to follow an order to return slaves to their masters, right? So he returned to Akron after he resigned his commission, traveled by himself, but he brought a runaway slave with him by the name of Frank Mitchell and brought him back to Akron to freedom. And when he returned to Akron, he was informed by Edgerton, his uncle, Sidney, that Lincoln had appointed him as a territorial justice to the territory of Idaho at the time. So he asked Sanders if he wanted to come with him, and he just said, sure. Because at that point, I think, he had been invested in the law firm before the war, and now that he was done with the war, he didn't really have anything keeping him away from following his uncle, who had asked him to go. And the lure of gold was already part of that idea, I think.
So the lure of gold, but then also just, hey, my uncle's getting this big promotion, if you will, this incredible opportunity, and somehow he's going to benefit from that.
Sure, and he's a lawyer.
Right.
And he's an orator and already a powerful politician in his beliefs at any rate, because he believes in the Republican Party that Lincoln has established. Both of them are not that Lincoln established the party, but he certainly was a champion for the abolition of slavery. And so Sanders and Edgerton were radical Republicans. They not only believed in the abolition of slavery, but they believed very strongly in the rights of freed black slaves to not only be free, but to hold equal level offices and positions in society as anybody else.
Let me ask this. They're radical. Is their abolitionist, did that come out of the greater family? Or was it, how much have you been able to learn on Sanders's position on that, which presumably he probably had from a very early age and was raised that way? And then, of course, his uncle at the time when he was born, I guess, is in Ohio. But could you just talk to that? Was that something that was in the broader context of the entire family? They had that belief, or was it that, kind of that feeling and pervasive in the North?
So it came from Edgerton and his relationship with Lincoln.
Okay.
And so Sanders idolized his uncle, and I think he followed a lot of his principles in moral and ethical beliefs.
Sure.
And he grew up on his father's farm in New York, and his father was extremely religious. And one of his forms of punishment was to force his son to memorize the Bible. So Sanders ultimately was a self-proclaimed agnostic. But he also believed in a lot of the teachings about right and wrong and fair treatment from the Bible, I would guess. But he was a very compassionate guy. He, took care of his siblings when they were babies, when it was not a normal thing for males to involve themselves in the care of children, but that was just his nature. So I think it was a lot of his nature.
And from what you know, was Sidney's beliefs very different than the rest of the family? Was it just he's close to Lincoln, but did the other parts of the extended family feel the same way he did?
Yes, Absolutely. So Martha Edgerton, which is Wilbur Fisk Sanders' cousin, who he communicates with his whole life, is very...
so Sidney's daughter.
Yeah, Sidney's very younger daughter. She's an activist for human rights her whole life, and a journalist, and she was involved in the newspaper business throughout her life.
Okay.
And so I would say that absolutely the family was very progressive.
Okay. So he follows Sidney out to Sidney's going to become the territorial justice.
Right. And so Sanders goes along with him simply to practice law.
Okay.
He's not going to... He does dabble in mining while he's out there, but his interest is in providing legal services. So there's lots of disputes over mines and those sorts of things. So he's making his living, and fairly well at the time, in Bannock as a lawyer immediately. And then, his uncle's this... jurist, but he's not able to practice because the capital's in Lewiston, 700 miles away across the Rocky Mountains, and the governor, Wallace, at the time is not able to swear him into his office. So they become early interested in separating the Montana territory from the Idaho territory.
Okay.
And that was what they chiefly involved themselves with. But the distraction is the lawlessness that's in not only Bannock, but then, as you pointed out, Nevada City and Virginia City, which just really just follows the new discoveries of gold. Right. So Bannock falls to the wayside, even though they cultivated quite a bit of gold out of Bannock for years to come. The newest strikes would always draw the big crowds. And so following the crowds were the government, as it were, and then legal practices. So Sanders just kind of followed where business was.
And I would imagine that's... I was thinking that for some reason I was just having this aha moment today where, like, okay, if someone comes in and is the first to strike gold, I would assume they think, who owns the land and who owns that right to all the potential gold in the area, right? And then the next thing you know, hundreds of people show up, the word gets out. I'm assuming that's essentially what Sanders was trying to deal with, was kind of property rights or claims and just otherwise settling dispute.
Yeah, just legal disputes over land and people, infringing on others' claims.
Right.
And then just, there were lots of gunfights, lots of violence. Sanders is probably best known, for those that do know him, for his role as a vigilante. Right. And so that term, vigilante, kind of comes after the incidents of the murder of this young Dutch boy named Nicholas Thibault. Right. Thibault. And he's killed over a couple of $100 in gold and a couple of mules by a guy named George Ives. And so Sanders' involvement as a vigilante was really just the one prosecution of George Ives and the hanging in Nevada City of George Ives by a miners' court, which was really effected more by a guy by the name of Captain James Williams. He and ex-Beeler. So these are names that people who are familiar with the Vigilantes of Montana know quite well. Sanders' involvement in the Vigilantes was immediately following the trial. He needed some protection because his life was threatened instantly by all the other members of what they called the road agents. Right. The Innocents is what they called themselves, which was this gang of outlaws that were killing people for their gold. It's just outright. And there'll be a name, Henry Plummer, who's the sheriff of not only Virginia City, Nevada City, and Bannock, but turns out to be the leader of this gang of road agents, the Innocents. He's the next to be hung, along with a couple of others, but Sanders did not have a role in any kind of trial. He wasn't hung by trial. He was hung by the Vigilantes. So that goes on for some time, and Sanders' involvement in the Vigilantes, as far as that's concerned, is next to nothing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe on his epitaph it says, "Men, do your duty," something like that, right? And that goes back to when the trial happens and they're going to hang this guy, and he says, "Men, do your duty."
So he did not say that.
He did not.
No, that was said by Captain James Williams.
Ah.
And so he ordered the hanging of George Ives in terms of the rope. Sanders took a poll from the miners' court of miners and outlaws both as to the punishment. And so the moment they declared that he was guilty, Sanders called for the immediate hanging until he was dead of George Ives.
I see.
And so it was then that the captain of the guards executed the ruling of the judge based on the yeas and the nays from this group of miners.
Did you have a point?
So I think when you mentioned the epitaph.
Who are you?
Steve.
This is his brother.
Yeah.
I can put him. There you are. I can put you on camera for a little bit.
So
Let me zoom in. Go ahead.
I think you were alluding to the epitaph saying that.
Can you slide the boom a little bit there, Gabe? So you can be seen. There you go.
Yeah, Wilbur Fisk Sanders said, "Men, do your duty."
Yeah.
I think that the epitaph that's there does allude to that. And am I wrong?
It does suggest
Okay.
that
And so, but what Ben's research found out was that that's wrong.
Okay.
Okay. And so there's a lot of discovery that because of Ben's work and research where he's over and over again corrected history.
Gotcha.
Okay. And he has the evidence to support that over and over again. And it's well documented. So that's a significant thing to understand about what Ben did.
So is it a matter of getting just the history correct, or is there a clearing Sanders' name in some way?
So one of my editors...
Or both?
Yes. One of my editors asked me that very question along the way. Sandy Vernon is her name. And she said to me, she asked me, "Ben, is this book a defense of your relative or your ancestor?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, it sounds an awful lot like you're defending some of the things that he's been criticized over that that look to me to be wrong." And I said, "Well, that's true." And she goes, "Well, then you should act like it." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, you're not owning that very well in the book. You point things out, and in fact, the book has an appendices, just one, called Interpretive History Theories, and its intention is entirely to go through some of the works of other authors who have written things about Sanders that I considered to be not only inaccurate but not supported by any kind of source." And so, but I didn't write the book to defend Sanders. I wrote the book because, like I said, as a child, I had heard a very brief history about some of the things he had done, including being a vigilante and Montana's first senator. But I knew there was a whole lot more to the story. And so I began to research. And then the trip that Steve and I took back to Montana that one year kind of got the cart rolling on me as far as gathering history on Wilbur Fisk Sanders going. And so I was using Ancestry.com. And it became very clear to me. I may not be able to say that.
You can.
Okay.
That's fine.
I was using Ancestry. And
they'll appreciate the publicity.
Right. And so it became clear to me that the stuff that was available in digits online was not enough. There was a lot more out there. And one of my other editors is Gabriel Kinsley.
Yeah.
And
there he is right
he's
there.
here today.
Oh, there you go. There's Gabe.
His dad and I kind of got into a little bit of backyard history because when Steve and I went home one year to Montana, and I went out to the Historical Society, I found a letter in a file to my dear little cousin. And I didn't know who that was and or where the letter was written.
To Martha.
To Martha.
Right.
And I thought it was to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but it turns out instead of P-E-N-N, it was actually T-E-N-N, and it was Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, the Battle of Shiloh.
Wow.
And so when I had read that little chunk of history that everybody reads that said that he had served in the for the Union in the Civil War and worked on the defenses of the railroads south of Nashville, it never really occurred to me what that meant, especially when I live in Huntsville, Alabama, until I went home. And then when I came home, I realized, well, Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, the Battle of Shiloh is right up the street from us, and the tracks south of Nashville run right into Decatur. So I didn't need to go to Montana anymore to study Wilbur Fisk Sanders. He had been in my own backyard.
Yeah.
And when I began to research that, it took me to Shiloh, and I took John Kinsley with me. And I took Steve Sanders with me as well. And we both ran around in the footsteps of Wilbur Fisk Sanders on the battlefields of Shiloh and in northern Tennessee, and ultimately right here in Huntsville.
Gotcha.
So
can you talk about the he resigned from the military, was that right? And there was something about, like, was it a health condition, or was it the position on slavery?
It was slavery.
That was that.
So
okay.
I went to the National Archives and looked for his military records. And there were no records of him filing any kind of claim for disability. And there were no sources that substantiated any kind of record where he had been shot at or injured in any way during his military service. Although he did get sick from probably yellow fever or typhoid or dysentery or something like that for some time. But all of Buell's army in northern Alabama suffered from starvation and disease terribly. But that wasn't why he resigned his commission. It became very clear to me that he resigned his commission over the use of slaves by the Northern Army, and then the federal government having guaranteed those folks protection.
Right.
And then they began to hand them back to their masters, who knew that they had given intelligence to the Union Army, so they were punishing these people. And that was his motivation.
Okay.
He just was not going to return slaves to their masters. And he had been given an order to do it. And that was documented very well in the official record. That's a collection of, they call it the War of the Rebellion. Thousands of pages of officers' reports, written reports that document, and in particular Mitchell's report on that incident.
Okay.
General Mitchell. So
that's definitely an aspect of history, right, that needs to be addressed. And it's just as far as what you can read and what someone will cite on, why he left the Army. And I think I found a few things where it's like, oh, he had an illness, and well, what's the illness?
And so, some of his political rivals accused him of running at the Battle of Shiloh, that he was a coward, and that he ran at the Battle of Shiloh. But these guys were running against him in political campaigns. And as you mentioned earlier, he failed a number of times in his political campaigns for a position called it was the territorial representative to Congress.
Right.
Because they could not have a senator if they weren't a state.
I think it was like 4 times in a row, right?
6.
Wow.
Yeah, 6 total times. And so, they accused him of that, and they said that, he was only a lieutenant, he wasn't a colonel. He was only a lieutenant in the Union Army. He got the title colonel from
Colonel Sanders.
From
It predated all that.
Right. So during some of the Indian uprising in the territory, he was given a position as colonel in the militia. by his uncle.
I gotcha.
So back then, almost all men of notoriety tried to grab hold of a title of either colonel or captain or major, and so I think that was pretty much the truth in the matter. But it wasn't because he didn't even arrive at the Battle of Shiloh until the end of the second day, and not a single person in his unit saw a bullet.
Yeah.
But at any rate,
did he have chances to interact with Lincoln?
No.
Okay.
No. Before Sanders made it to Washington, Lincoln was assassinated, and Johnson became the president. And Johnson, Andrew Johnson, he was chiefly the reason behind Edgerton being replaced, because that governor position for the territory was an appointed one.
Right.
Not that he quit his position, which is another misnomer. And there's a long list, and a lot of these are really just politically driven, not by politics today, but because of the record at the time of the politics during those days.
Mm-hmm.
So they were pretty cutthroat. Newspapers back in the day, before there was television or radio or the internet, they were it. They were the only news, the new information that's available out there. And they were very political. They called themselves the this Democrat or the that Republican paper.
Wow.
And they made no bones about their positions. But they were ruthless in their use of accusations and claims and slanders and right. Nobody checked him on it. There was no, you can't say that kind of thing in the paper.
So what was his day-to-day life like? What have you been able to glean on that?
I think he was a reader. I think he spent hours and hours and hours reading the law. And he, admits his favorite place in the world was his library.
Okay.
And so as an attorney, I'm sure he did a lot of reading. And so I think he was a reader, and he was an orator. He did a lot of public speaking.
What do you know of who were his inspirations? Like, I think of Jefferson comes to mind when I think of someone who was constantly studying and tinkering. But do you have any idea on?
So Lincoln was absolutely. As a matter of fact, Sanders didn't meet Lincoln, but he did go to his inauguration. There's a story in the book where he, as a young man, traveled from Ohio with a friend of his, Manderson, and they sat in the galley overlooking the Senate, and they were there to witness the inauguration of President Lincoln. So that he was absolutely an influence. And his uncle, Sidney Edgerton, huge influence.
But what about I guess books were not as plentiful, right, back in those days, but was he aware of the founding fathers? And
oh yeah.
And did he have any in particular?
He had lots of opinions on
that.
All sorts of men from those times. As a matter of fact, he wasn't a fan of a lot of folks that we kind of think as heroes, who were legislators who took one position and are known for another position. And all politicians and attorneys, for that matter, often engage in contradictory behavior depending on the politics and their objectives. So I think that the founding fathers, he never really speaks to any particular one, but he certainly speaks to their politics. So I can't really say that he had a particular founding father that he quoted or.
Now his entry into started off with a bang, right? Or how he became known through the trial and the hanging and stuff that really kind of launched him. But can you give a sense then on, was he always at odds, like throughout his career and his life? Was there always this? Again, looking at people, hey, you love him or hate him. Like, how did he maintain that feeling, if you will, or the sentiment that the public had towards him?
So he took really hardline stance.
Okay.
So he believed in what they called fair money, and so when the free silver movement began, Sanders took a hard line against free silver because it was founded on the idea of devaluating silver so that it was more powerful only in the United States, which made it less valuable on the world market. This drove a lot of different opinion and political maneuvering and behavior. And so he was early called a gold bug, and they accused him of, being in favor of the gold industry, and even some accused him of mining for gold, but he never really mined for gold, and if he did any, it was for silver.
Yeah.
And he had taken a position in favor of silver, but it was not at the ratio that made it free silver. So they said he contradicted himself. So General Marr, Thomas Francis Marr, came to the territory as secretary, and he replaced Edgerton until Green Clay Smith came in. And so Marr died. He fell off a paddle boat in Fort Benton. And decades later, in the 1960s, someone decided that they were going to come up with a theory that Sanders had pushed Marr off the paddle boat and murdered him. And then that was proliferated by a few other writers and over the years, and that's one of the controversies behind Sanders is the death of Thomas Francis Marr. He also tried cases defending the Chinese in Butte who were boycotted. Right. But then again, he spoke on the Senate floor in favor of the exclusion of the Chinese from the United States because his party at the time, the Republicans, felt that it was the government of China that was attempting to influence politics in the United States, the government of the United States, and to take wealth from the United States by way of removing gold through laborers who didn't stay here. They came, they worked, and they went back home, and they took their gold, and they didn't pay taxes. And so he was in favor of exclusion of the Chinese. One of the reasons was because they were being enslaved by their own country here. They would come to the U.S. on contracts to work and provide gold back to China, and that was another form of slavery. It was just like the cartels today.
Yeah.
And
now, is this stuff that you've been able to clarify through history, or
absolutely?
So did people consider him a flip flopper on that towards China at that time?
So he actually tried the Chinese case in Butte after his term in the Senate, where he voted on Chinese exclusion, and he had earlier spoke against Chinese exclusion, but that was also because he was in favor of the railroad, and so they did the vast majority of the labor on the railroad.
Okay.
So, all of politics, depending on objectives, I think results in people saying things in the course of a voting environment like the Senate that aren't necessarily how they feel. They're trying to complete an objective. Roosevelt did the same thing. And so there's a book by Mark Johnson called the Middle Kingdom Under the Big Sky. Talks about the experience of Chinese people in Montana early on, and so he recognizes that very thing, how politics are often inconsistent.
And the Chinese were coming for the gold rush?
Oh, absolutely.
So immigrants from all over the world were pouring in, right?
But the Chinese were a huge degree of labor. And then Sanders also defended Native Americans. He freed 2 Northern Cheyenne braves that were prosecuted and imprisoned falsely for the murder of a sheep herder by the name of Hoover. And he spoke against reservations because he felt like they didn't provide for their traditional lifestyle. They were tiny little microcosms of land that could never support herds of buffalo and their lifestyle of hunting and gathering, and were really kind of prison camps, where they were forced onto reservations that weren't representative of their traditional homelands, and forced to survive on government subsidies that they didn't always get. So he was criticized for speaking against reservations, but he was an advocate for the fair treatment and good treatment of Indians, and so he his last case of his life, I believe, was the case to defend Little Whirlwind and Spotted Hawk.
Those are the two people, huh?
The Northern Cheyennes.
Wow.
So he went through 2 governors to free them.
Now, he was a senator in 1890, right?
1889.
1889. And
then 90 and 91 and 92.
He served a short term.
He had the 3-year term. So Power was T.C. Power was the other senator who drew the long term. And the reason Sanders is the first was he was sworn in the day before Power. He became the first senator that way.
I got you. I forgot about that in my history of senators and things and terms. So he drew the short assignment.
Yeah, so all his failures before that were for the delegate position.
Right.
But only one Republican out of all the people that ran for that delegate position won.
And how many kids did he have?
So he had 3 sons. Record says he had 5 kids, but apparently 2 of them died either at childbirth or
hard living back then.
Even before miscarriages, probably.
Yeah.
But there's no real record of them, except for a couple statements where somebody indicated that he had 5 kids.
Did he outlive his wife?
No.
No.
Harriet, an amazing woman, who painted the cover that dons the jacket there. That's an oil painting she did probably when they lived in Ohio.
Here, let me do this.
And if
I'll zoom in later on it too.
Sure. Anyone that ever goes to the Sanders Bed and Breakfast in Helena, Montana, which is the house that's in there, there's a few paintings in there that are clearly representative of Harriet's work that are still there. Well-preserved house that has a lot of their original family belongings. And
so if you're a child living in Montana, you grow up and you're learning history, state history, the territory, are they all very aware of Wilbur Fisk Sanders in the story that is told?
So I would say not. However, it didn't always used to be that way. Back when Steve was going to the University of Montana and when I was in high school, there was actually mandatory education for, like, if you were a history major at the University of Montana that included Wilbur Fisk Sanders, and he was probably more well-known then.
Okay.
And not just for Thomas Francis Meagher. And so my foreword was written by a fellow by the name of Paul R. Wiley, who wrote a book on Meagher, General Meagher. And there's others who have written books that go directly after Sanders and accuse him outward, just unabashed about being the murderer of Thomas Francis Meagher. But their books don't have any citations to support their positions. And so Paul is very aware of that, and if you read his foreword, you'll see how he feels on the subject. But so part of the purpose of this book is to improve the thing that you're saying. He's a very important part of certainly Montana history, and he represents a very important part of law in America, and the respect of the law and the implementation of law.
Right.
And so it's called Order Without Law for a couple of reasons. It's part of a quote that he made during the Ives trial when he was, there was a lot of critics at the time about hanging somebody without a legitimate form of government as described in the Constitution of a state. They were operating off of an organic act.
Right.
That did not provide for that. And they used the Idaho law as a model, but they still did not have a formal legalized system. So he said, I'd rather have order without law if I can't have legitimate law.
Yeah.
So that's part of a quote. But order without law is also another description of vigilantism. And so that was kind of the reason I selected that as part of the title.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's an important piece, in particular as we opened up the podcast talking about, okay, well, if you live in Alabama, what are you going to learn from? What is it we're trying to learn from Wilbur Fisk Sanders?
Right. Well, we have laws
and
in
the
this
legacy. Go ahead.
No, so we have laws in this country that even it would seem our highest level of leadership don't necessarily follow, and there is no consequence, you know. And so throughout history, you know, we kind of feel like we're living in a period of extreme unrest and turmoil and things that are disturbing to us in terms of a normalized natural society under the law.
Right.
And but this book shows clearly that we've been through a whole lot worse, and things have been far more lawless than they are now. And we've come together as Americans with the leadership of people like Wilbur Fisk Sanders, I would say, and overcome those things and come together as a country and have gotten past it and become better.
I can't even imagine as I sit here and try to imagine what was going on. You know, you're migrating from Ohio to Montana, the Great West. There's people are pouring in, and you know the Civil War is about to break out.
It's raging.
It's raging
in the middle of
Well, I guess I was thinking 1849, but you know,
right.
But and who belongs to what? And it's just it's a miracle upon miracle upon miracle, right? That we are where we're at now.
I agree. So that territory, there were a lot of Southern people there.
Yeah.
A lot of Confederate runaways from the Army.
Mm-hmm.
The Confederacy was not doing well. They were marching thousands of miles with no shoes. They had almost no uniforms. They had, both sides were eating up every resource to survive. As a matter of fact, part of the story around Huntsville is the fact that the Northern Army soldiers would gather along the Tennessee River and wade out to islands and trade with Confederate soldiers.
Really?
And tobacco and tea and coffee and things like that, and other sustenance, right? They got along over the river. Well, neither side, the leadership on either side could tolerate this kind of thing, so they had tried to put an end to it. But it's very interesting how this major conflict that divided a nation also demonstrated that we were still one people.
Yeah.
And even soldiers on separate sides could embrace each other.
What would Sanders think today of our society?
I think he'd dig in and fight the fight. I think that was his.
He'd be on Twitter.
He'd be somewhere. He'd be on X, right?
This guy, damn this Sanders.
Yeah. So I don't know what forum he'd be in, but he would not be silent.
Yeah.
Certainly.
There might be some people getting hanged.
Well, it goes back to, you're talking about like people above the law, right? So I used to work up in D.C. and in the intel community, and I kid you not, I'm running a program, and we would be threatened that we're going to go to jail if we had a white elephant party, and if we charged people, the wrong amount of money, and it was like they're joking, but they're not joking.
Right.
I don't want to see you in orange, like over a white elephant party. I also had to fire people on the spot if you found a piece of classified documentation, right, in their car. Which not only fire, but take your clearance, like you're done.
Right.
Yet, presidents of the United States can, whatever. You can have an email server. You can take and nothing happens.
Right.
Yet I'm being threatened because I might charge somebody $11.
Yeah.
To attend a white elephant buy pizza. Like, really, get out of here.
Right. So Sanders got a job as the attorney for the Northern Pacific Railroad.
Oh, wow.
So the governor at the time, Benjamin Franklin Potts, also wanted to either be in business with the Northern Pacific or to get a job.
Governor of which state?
Of the territory of Montana.
Oh, the territory. Okay.
So he was the longest running territorial governor. He's also the guy that wrote in a letter to Garfield that Sanders was the most unscrupulous lawyer that ever practiced the law, which is also out there, which is another derogatory thing that has been printed about Sanders. But it only remembers that particular sentence out of an entire letter. And Potts was in competition with Sanders for at least control of the Republican Party, because Sanders was very influential over the Republicans, and this job with the Northern Pacific Railroad. So, a lot of people accused him of being unscrupulous and unethical by working for the Northern Pacific, which had all these Chinese people working for it, but then he voted against, he voted in favor of Chinese exclusion, but he's also in favor of them working on the railroad. So, and whether that's legal or not, well, so like you're talking about, it depends on whose perspective you're getting on whether something's legal enough to enforce the law and some penalty for breaking the law, or whether or not it's, there's a good reason for breaking that law.
Is there any aspect of his story that you would like to, set the record straight that you have not been able to? Does that make sense? Is there something still lingering out there?
Not in my mind. I think the biggest thing is that he was a very, very well-intentioned man who sacrificed his own life and his own and I mean in terms of success and wealth. He destroyed his political career over what he felt was right. And I think I've demonstrated his motives based on the body of his behavior rather than a single sentence out of a letter or somebody's conspiracy theory or theory about him murdering Thomas Francis Meagher, for instance, which there just is no evidence of. So I think I've done as much as anyone can do to set the record straight in terms of Wilbur Fisk Sanders.
Well, he did a lot more than that, because Wilbur Fisk Sanders II is a man that Ben and I watched suffer with issues regarding the proper storage of historical documents that were kept in the crawl space of his house, that were rotting away, molding.
That's your grandfather.
That's Wilbur Fisk Sanders II, my grandfather.
Your grandfather.
And he had documents stored in the crawl space of his home. And as he reached, and he knew he was reaching the end of his life, he was frantically trying to document these documents, and he wrote a booklet called Biscuits and Bad Men, trying to do that. And he went through all of those documents and tried to accumulate the most important ones and put some stories together just to leave some legacy and to try to keep from having valuable documents lost.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Wilbur Fisk Sanders I did was help establish the Montana Historical Society. So when you write something that's extremely valuable, you put it on a thumb drive, or you got it on a CD, or you got a file cabinet that's a very safe place to put it. He didn't have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so his repository was the Historical Society. That building had boxes and boxes and boxes of documents just sitting in the basement rotting away. And they're not well funded. Ben and I talked to him about digitizing all those documents. They couldn't afford it. And so we watched Wilbur Fisk Sanders II, my grandfather, try to, preserve valuable documents, and he went out of his way to write a book, and Ben saw that. Ben saw those efforts, and Ben discovered the poor state of the historical society. And that book takes all of those things and basically is a safe repository for all those valuable documents in one way or another.
Yeah. I'll tell you a personal story real quick, if you don't mind.
No.
So people like, my last name is Bye.
Right.
It's odd, right? B-Y-E. You know, and I got teased growing up, and I come to learn later. Well, I knew my grandfather his family had immigrated from Norway, and so over time I've learned that if your surname is Bye, you're in Minnesota. They came from Norway into Minnesota, and then from there, and you'll see it. It's actually not completely uncommon. There's actually a few Byes in this area, and there was a few in Virginia, but we're not necessarily all closely related. Well, as it turns out, so we've always known that our family history, but it wasn't until someone found an immigration card, and it's my great 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 grandfather. His name was Esaias Justin, and he's from a town called Shoreby, Norway, and it's like Sorbyei. That's how it's spelled. And so we've always had the family history to know who these people are, but we never really knew, what happened? Why did Esaias Justin then have a son named Johannes Justin Bye? Or it was Esaias and Justin Bye or something like that. And there's an immigration card where at Ellis Island, they just changed the name.
Right.
Just like that. And they must have, and it wasn't until you get the card, I guess we kind of knew that, but it wasn't until you see it that it's they took it from the town name, his residence in Norway.
Right.
And so just like that, we, 4 generations ago, we're now Bye, B-Y-E.
Right. Absolutely.
So dang those people for making fun of me.
Yeah.
I guess it would have been worse if I was Justin or something, or Esiason or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah. Or Lipschitz.
But it goes back to the
right. So my neighbor I had a neighbor in Missoula.
Careful on the spelling.
Right. Yeah. His name was Larry Lips, and we always thought it was a funny name. But he explained to our dad one time, Wilbur Fisk Sanders III, my father, right, that they were Lipschitz, but when their family migrated to the United States at the time, German.
Leibschitz or something.
Germans were not looked upon very
favorably,
favorably, and probably during World War II.
Except for Werner von Braun, who's a god here in Huntsville.
You know it, right? But yeah, so they dropped the last part of Lipschitz, and so he's Larry Lips.
Larry
formally,
Lips,
right?
Okay.
But a lot of that Sanders is actually Saunders with a
Really?
U, but it flip flops throughout history. You mentioned that you had researched your family back to the
13th,
14th century,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and so there's some theories about Sanders being actually short for Alexander, that those ancestors came from the slaves of Alexander the Great.
Oh, wow.
But our Sanders actually come from a province, an area in Ireland. It's as Irish as you can get. So those that believe that the whole Mar thing is Sanders being anti-Irish is absolutely false, because the name, his origins are, even his coat of arms is about as Irish as you can get. Sanders Court near Wexford, Ireland, is where we come from originally. But nobody knows why the U came and went. It just does. And there's no political reason for doing it, I think. And I've had people misprint my name on documents with a U, and I'm like, no, I'm Sanders. So it's just clerical error as part of our.
Well, you've learned a lot about data entry error.
There you go.
Right, and talk about back then when it was a handwritten.
Yeah.
Probably spelled the name, they just didn't catch it, or they didn't write the U.
Sloppy. Somebody couldn't read it. Right.
Happens all the time.
Sure.
Especially when you're trying to catch terrorists that are all named Mahmoud, Muhammad Ali, whatever. I mean,
sure.
There's some very sophisticated software that tries to sort that out.
Right.
That you have the right guy before you go after him.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work CT, by the way, so that's why I know this stuff.
Okay. Good.
It gets very confusing. I'm going to slide the book towards you.
Sure.
And if you would like to just kind of talk about the construction of it or any of the highlights of the actual physical copy, I'll do that since you're on camera.
Yeah. So
my wife's bookmark that's not my bookmark. It's not my So just want to highlight that.
Although purple, I think purple.
We bought it on Amazon, and we're happy to do it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I could tease you about the buy thing right now. But
Can you?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's your bookmark, right?
That's true.
By the way, the construct of this book is a little bit interesting. I did it from a data perspective. So what that meant was I accumulated a ton of data. This book originally was about 1,700 pages.
Oh, my goodness.
In length. And so I kind of reversed engineered a book out of all the data that I had. So along the way, what I started doing was collecting the sources that I used. So I really had a more formalized reference table than I did have a book. And it's guys like Gabriel who told me things like, Ben, you got a lot of information in here, but some of it isn't relevant to your great-great-grandfather. And some of it doesn't make sense. It doesn't flow. You need to create a story that reads.
Well done, Gabe.
From beginning to end, where folks don't feel like they're just chopping wood to get through all this stuff, right? And that it grabbed you a little bit. So there was a lot of weeding that happened. And so much as one of the things my brother pointed out was most people read at about the 7th grade level. Mm-hmm. Not everybody, but the vast majority of people don't read at a level that requires a thesaurus to figure out what it is you're reading, right? And so I had to try to change the language, which these folks like to write about themselves in particular, with lots of what they call purple prose and lots of extra language that didn't really serve a lot of purpose. So we worked really hard to cut it down to simpler language that everybody can appreciate that reads. Also, most of the chapters are 20 pages or less. So the reason there's 23 chapters is because we literally had to go in and say, we're going to end this chapter right here, not because the story has a natural ending or beginning in that particular spot.
So it's down to around the 500-page mark?
Right.
Okay.
And so, but a lot of that, there's almost 50 pages of reference and bibliography. And the index is pretty beefy too, but it's also an index that doesn't just have every single name that's in the book. It has a lot of them, but mostly the ones that are relevant. And there's not a lot of stuff in there that, Sanders appears in here quite a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
Wilbur Fisk Sanders.
So the construct of that book is unique in that I like the fact that everything that's in there has got documents to back up what he says is fact. I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And so what Ben does is, in the beginning of the book, he discusses gaps. Did you read that part?
I did not. No.
So there may be some historical document that provides factual evidence of something at one point on a timeline, and then there's this gap where there's nothing, right? And then there's another, factual document here. But what about this piece where there's nothing? And so Ben describes how some authors, when they're writing their product, fill in the gap with what they think might be what they, and they have their own personal twist on it.
Revisionist history.
And so that's an issue that we're facing with other people telling stories about our great-great-grandfather.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So some people call that formally interpretive history theory. And so there's a place for that where, you can speculate. And most of that stuff comes with a, may have been or probably was or some kind of qualifying statement that doesn't try to put it off as fact. And usually interpretive theory is speaking to some piece that we do know. It just doesn't quite make a lot of sense to us, or we just don't fully understand it. Not to fill in gaps where there's nothing. That's called fiction.
Yeah.
Writing. And so this book is absolutely intended to be nonfiction without op-ed, except for that chapter on interpretive history theory. And it's not meant to be so much as opinion, it's supposed to be, here's what the record says, and this is what somebody has written that has not cited some source that they've used to support their position. So I challenge that.
Yeah.
And so that really is the construct of the book.
Before I forget to ask this, how did he die?
So he died of cancer. What you and I would normally go have removed, very simply, skin cancer on the face.
Really?
He had, and you can see this in a couple of his later photographs where he looks like he might have had a little growth on the eyelid or of the eye. At one point, he had an eye completely removed when he was...
Which eye?
The bad one.
So you see this scar?
Yeah.
So I had skin cancer removed under. Which eye did he have?
Same eye.
So in the photographs, it's his left.
Oh.
And I believe it was his left. So that's your right.
Okay. I'm safe then.
Okay. I actually thought that was a scar from your boxing days. I didn't know you had a cancer removed.
So this is where a bullet fragment hit me, and several years later it evolved into a
cancer,
skin cancer. Yeah.
Right. So he had no kind of correlating injury or anything. He just started getting. Now I'll tell you, he spent a lot of time outside.
Oh yeah.
And they didn't use SPF anything in those days. So he probably.
And he lived to almost 70. He was almost 70 years old, right?
Yes.
I think he was born in 34 and died in like 05 or something like that.
So he died in 07. I think he was 72.
Okay. Oh, so he did get past 70.
Yeah. And so
a good life for back then.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, very good. He lived a comfortable life. Yeah. But one of the things that is not really well documented in the book that just impressed me so much about these people. We talk a lot about how people are suffering today, but I mean, these people literally lived in the dark.
Yeah.
When the sun went down, it was pitch black, and very few places, certainly in the territory of Montana, in these mining camps, had any street lighting or anything. Yeah, and when you talk about cold, you either built a fire or you had some kind of stove.
The fire ran all winter.
There was no central heat.
Yeah.
There was no heating in any kind of transportation. Sanders used to heat up rocks and put them between two pieces of wood and wrap them in felt to put under his wife's feet in their buggy as they traveled all the way back east to visit her mother, to keep her feet warm. I mean, the things they went through where they kept the babies huddled in their wagon on their trip to Montana and towards the end. And so people question, well, it was September. He could have made it all the way to Lewiston. Well, at night they would wake up with an inch of ice on top of the water in their buckets. And, when you're like looking at the Rocky Mountains thinking, do we keep going or do we go to the gold town where I think they made the right choice,
It's brutal, man.
for them. So the conditions were. These people lived through.
They weren't living. They weren't lying down in a beautiful bed.
No.
I
slept
primitive
in his bed.
Construction and everything.
I slept in his bed in the Sanders bed and Sanders bed and breakfast, and it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And these people were well off. It was nothing but a spring between a headboard and footboard, and it would have been a down mattress.
Let me ask you this: if we're here right now, sitting where Steve, right, is sitting, what would you say to him? What would you ask him? If you could you only have time for 3 questions, and he's going back about his business on the other side here of the veil. But what would you want to know?
I don't know that I'd want to know anything that I don't know already. I don't have questions about who he was or why he did anything. What I would want to do is express to him some things, and mostly my gratitude, because I see in my brother, I saw in my father and my sister and myself a quality that could only have been cultivated in a generational influence like he had over his kids and family, which was profoundly founded on love more than anything else. He loved his family, he loved his kids, he loved his wife, and he made them all feel that he did. There's a number of accounts where people that he had prosecuted wanted to kill him, and one of them was going to shoot him on his front step, but he was not able to pull the trigger because shortly after he left his house, the Sanders bed and breakfast, his son came running down the stairs in the walkway and said, "Papa, kiss me." And he bent down and gave his son a kiss before he left for the day. So the dude was like, "I can't shoot this guy." And so my family has been always a family of deep love and respect for each other and treatment and a principle. My brother didn't join the Army because he thought he was going to go get rich.
Sure.
He didn't join the Army because he was lacking excitement in his life. The guy tried to kill himself on a motorcycle about every other day, right? And he, jumped through the ice on the frozen river of the Clark Fork in a wetsuit trying to get on That's Incredible TV show.
I remember that.
Right? But so he did it because he felt an obligation, a patriotism that I think has been part of our lives as Sanders. And I think that's what I'd want to say to him. I want to say thank you. And for his sacrifice, for his love. And he was, like I said, he was not a rich man. He didn't leave us all some legacy of money. He died poor. In fact, his wife had to get a kind of a widow's pension after he died. And they gave it to him because he was a senator. But, so, the spirit of sacrifice and service that he gave us. And, I couldn't ask him any question that would come to my mind about something I don't know about him already, because I feel like I do. I feel like I know him. 1,700
pages. The original, man, that's impressive.
Yeah.
It's impressive, and I'm sure that your family appreciates what you're doing, right, and what you have done. How many hours do you think you've put into this?
14 years.
14
Do
years.
the math.
Every day? Most days?
Well, not all day, because I did have a job.
I don't want to make him,
Yeah, so I did spend probably every night.
He wasn't on the other end of the Teams meetings, phone calls, and all that stuff, and there were some very heated moments between us, over the years on how we should do business.
Well, you ask somebody for help and then you beat the crap out of them.
Yeah, that did happen.
For the help they give you. So, thousands of hours. But it's, to me, it's been and still is an obsession. I've always loved information, data. I've always been obsessed with aligning the numbers, and the columns and rows, and that kind of stuff. And so this is kind of history is about organizing information, certainly. And so from that 1,700 pages and this book, there's another manuscript on another fella that's also my great-great-grandfather, William Francis Fitzgerald, that went on to be the first, or not the first, but the Attorney General of the state of California. And he was a young man that served in the 10th Mississippi when he felt like the North was invading his homeland, and he ran home to his mother and enlisted at the age of 15 and fought through the whole Civil War. And then was an attorney in Mississippi, and then one of the sitting justices in the territory of Arizona. So his story is really good, and it comes from that same body of work. But I don't know that I'm going to immerse myself in book writing with his manuscript like I did this one.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts? I mean, I think we're at a kind of a good ending point here.
My biggest comment is I feel like this is a history that has needed to be told in its entirety and accurately, and now it's out there. And I encourage anybody that enjoys reading something that they'll feel is relevant to their own lives and appreciates history. And I think a good read, thank you, Gabriel, and Sandy, and Steve, for helping me make it that way. And I do believe it's a good read, and it's an enjoyable book, and it's necessary.
Gabe, anything you want to say?
Yeah.
Pull the microphone a little bit towards you.
Quick question. For the special thanks, why am I on the very last page of the book? Most people put those like at the front. Is there a reason? Like, was I a little too late on the updates, or what are we talking about here?
So that's a good question, Gabe, because you're the last thing I want people to have in their mind after reading the book. And that's a true statement, because you're included there with the only other people that I thanked as well. And that's not a lot.
And you're from Michigan. It's just a slight.
I'll take that.
He'll take that. Yeah. Good.
It's been fun. We chatted a little bit before we hit record on, how I find guests and all that. And his dad, I was actually supposed to interview a lady named Rhonda Sutton, who's in charge of AUSA, the chapter for AUSA Huntsville. Mm-hmm. And John Kinsley has a role, I think, on the board with AUSA, and he also co-hosts the parade with Liz Hurley, the Veterans Day Parade.
Yeah.
And so I think, in a way, thankfully, Rhonda was like, you know what, how about you interview John? Don't interview me. I said, okay. So I interviewed John Kinsley, and it's turned into a friendship. We're in the same industry, and of course, he's former Materiel Command. And I really, of all the episodes I've done, I really enjoyed that one, because just like as you're here talking today about your family, the Kinsley family is amazing, and Lansing and the other parts of Michigan. And I actually showed a newspaper clipping that John had never seen of him and his grandfather at the state fair when he was 13 years old. He had never seen the picture, but I came across it because if you're from Michigan and you're a Kinsley, then you're a part of the same family. And there was just really good, and they did enough things where they were in the newspaper. And those newspapers have digitized, and so there's just some great insights into his father and the farm, and they had foreign exchange students, and it was just a really fun episode. And it's now fun to fast forward, and there's some stuff that Gabe, I want to hire Gabe for, and I know I've referred him to different people, and it's just fun now that this network grows.
Yes.
And now this expands to Ben Sanders. I'm like, cool, and it's just so fun how simple means produce big things, right?
Sure enough.
So I really appreciate your time and you coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Troy. I appreciate you hosting me to talk a little bit.
Well, I hope that one night you have that opportunity. I hope Wilbur Fisk Sanders comes to you in a dream or in your sleep, and you get a chance to thank him. Maybe you never know, right?
Right. Well,
crazier things have happened.
If he does, I will.
Hopefully,
and then you'll be the first person I tell that it happened.
And that's the third book.
That'll be the third book.
Hey, well, I wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir.
We will read it. The downside of hosting your own podcast and doing everything related to it is I only have so much time, and I have to research every guest. And I don't want to boo-hoo you, but I wish I had a staff. And then if I had a staff, well, then I would have read your book.
I think you did a good job.
But my wife says, I said, why don't you just read it to me? Or do you actually? Who's going to do your audiobook?
So my son, William Sanders, not Wilbur. That was my attempt to get somebody named Wilbur Fisk Sanders, which my wife at the time said no.
That ain't gonna ever happen.
Ain't gonna never happen.
But William's gonna do the audio.
So William's already
doing it,
recording. He does a lot of recording.
Cool.
And so he's on chapter 1. He's made it through the foreword and the preface, but we just got started. So he's doing a fine job. And so you'll be able to listen to it on your commute into...
Yeah, I run or I listen to stuff in the car. It's usually how I do books.
That's me.
So
good.
Hey, well, all the best to you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to the future, man. And I hope, just keep us posted.
Okay, Troy.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Yeah, throw that one in there.